destruction of the foot by trophic ulceration is one of the commonest and the most crippling of all the complications, and yet it's one of the most easily prevented with the patient's full cooperation. I believe that the problem of ulceration will finally be conquered only when it's realized that the damage to the foot is not a problem of medicine, it is a problem of mechanics. And when we understand the mechanics of damage to the foot, we understand how we can prevent the damage by footwear. The disease itself is not usually the cause of direct damage to the foot. Sensation of pain, and after that, it is usually mechanical force and pressure that damages the foot. So in order to understand why we need to protect the foot with footwear, we must begin by defining what we mean by force and pressure. I've just finished drawing a sketch of a man who weighs 100 kilograms. And that 100 kilograms has to reach the ground. 50 kilograms comes down each leg. And I've used a 10 kilogram unit to indicate how it reaches the ground. His heel is smaller than his forefoot, so we can have 2 units under the heel, 3 under the forefoot, 2 under the heel, 3 under the forefoot. That makes 10 units of 10 kilograms, so the whole of his weight reaches the ground through both his feet. Now, the problem is that every time he takes a step, he lifts 1 foot off the ground. And therefore the whole weight has to come down now through 1 foot. This foot is already taking 5 units, and now it has to take 2 more units under the heel, and 3 more units under the forefoot. So the pressure in those areas is substantially increased. And now we go to when he's actually walking, and we see that his heel is off the ground. And because his heel is off the ground, those 4 units that were under the heel have to come under the forefoot. So we have to add 2 more units from the heel and 2 more units from the other heel, and now we have 10 units under the forefoot. And now we're beginning to get rather high pressure, not because the force has changed, but because the area has been reduced. The final problem is that people sometimes hurry when they're walking. And this gentleman is really hurrying. He's trying to get there, and his hair is flowing behind him, and his leg has come forward, and now the foot is nearly vertical. This happens whenever we hurry, taking long strides. The heel goes way up, and now the forefoot isn't 3 units wide, it's only 2 units wide. And therefore, not only has he got to take the weight of the heel and the other foot, but he's got to reduce the area available. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 units of force reaching the ground through a very, very small area. And this is the time when that little area of skin under his forefoot is likely to break down. So let's remember that if we're going to keep this man safe, we've got to find a way to change from this situation back a little more nearly to this situation, where the pressure is spread. He can do it by walking slowly, but we'd like to make shoes that make it safe even to walk a little fast. There is a very wide variety of ways in which a foot can be damaged once the sensation of pain has been lost. And it's really very important in any given case to be able to know what the problem was so that we can devise a shoe to prevent it from happening again. The patient can't remember what happened because he didn't feel it. And therefore we have done a lot of study on this, and we've finally come up with an analysis of 5 different ways in which an insensitive foot can be damaged. And I want just to list them now and then go through them one by one in more detail. The first is from direct immediate damage, or perhaps a burn. The second is continuous pressure. The way this works is to deprive the skin of blood until finally a little piece of skin becomes gangrenous. Thirdly, long walks, or a succession of long walks. Here it isn't immediate pressure, but it's an accumulation of inflammation and soreness that finally breaks down. The fourth is the effect of friction and shear stress. And the fifth is when a person walks on a foot that is already infected, damages by spreading the infection. Now, of these five, I think that the easiest to understand is the first one, that is direct damage or burn. We understand it because it happens to us. It happens to a person who maybe has normal sensation. If you go out in the dark, walking barefoot, you can step on something unpleasant, like one of these things down here. And the foot becomes damaged because the whole weight of the body comes down on a very, very small area, like the edge of broken glass or the point of a thorn. The area is so small that even a small weight will allow it to penetrate immediately into the foot. And after it's penetrated, sometimes it'll break off in the foot. And then that thorn will remain in the foot and be driven more deeply at each step till it finally forms an abscess. Now, these things may happen to a normal individual with pain sensation, but he may be able to stop before it really causes harm and pull his foot away. In the absence of pain, the only way to preserve the foot is to make the rule, never walk barefoot. Never walk barefoot without the sensation of pain. Many people use Hawaiian sandals as a protection for their feet. And they're very good sandals, but they have one severe defect, and that is that they have no resistance against penetration by sharp objects. And therefore, if one wants to use this kind of sandal, you have to take an undersole of hard material, like vulcanized rubber from a tire, and fasten it to the underside of the Hawaiian sandal, and that is satisfactory. It can be fastened by means of adhesive or by stitching, but not by nails. Every shoe for an insensitive foot needs to have a hard undersole, and it must never be fixed with nails or with staples that might penetrate the foot. The rule for shoes and footwear for insensitive feet is adhesive or stitching. Now, the second cause of damage to the insensitive foot is from continuous pressure maintained for a long time. This does the damage by gangrene, by depriving the skin of its blood supply. And let me make it clear now, we are not talking about high pressure. The pressure under the foot may be 2 or 3 kilograms per square centimeter. But here, if I press my finger on a slide, you can see it blanching. And this pressure is so small I can hardly feel it. It amounts to about 1/10 of 1 kilogram per square centimeter. It's a very, very small pressure. But to do damage, it must be continuous for several hours. The reason we don't get this problem on the sole of the foot is that although the sole is deprived of blood supply every time it is stood upon, at every step it leaves the ground and has a fresh blood supply. And therefore nobody ever stands absolutely still for 6 or 7 hours. So we don't get this problem on the sole, but where we do get it is on the side of the foot. Here I have a piece of transparent cellophane tape, and you see I put it round the foot, I'm using my hand, but it's the same as if it were a tight shoe or a tight strap around the foot. And you see wherever this tape crosses a prominence or around the edge of the hand, where it turns a sharp corner, you get blanching or bloodlessness. So if anybody keeps a tight sandal strap or a tight shoe on his foot all day long, he will get death of tissue before the end of the day. in order to prevent the damage to the foot by continuous pressure, we want to suggest a few rather simple rules. And the first is to remember that most people judge the tightness of their shoe by how it feels. And these patients can't feel, and therefore somebody has got to make sure when they get new shoes that they fit and that they're not too tight anywhere. This may be the shoemaker or a therapist or a family member, but it's got to be done every time. The second rule is that however carefully a shoe has been prepared and molded, and however sure we are that it's a good fit, it should never be worn for more than 2 or 3 hours at a time on the first day or the first 2 days, in case we... And finally, let me just mention that plastic shoes don't adapt. Rubber shoes don't adapt to the foot. And however long you have them, they remain too tight if they were too tight to begin with. And so we don't like these sort of materials for people who can't feel. The third cause of breakdown in insensitive feet is from long walks, resulting in ulcers from inflammation. This is quite different from the other two causes, yet it's the most common of them all. It happens when the pressures under the foot are quite moderate and not high enough to cause any direct injury. But after many thousands of steps during a long walk, the areas of somewhat high pressure become inflamed and more liable to further damage. This happens to normal feet too. A person may start a day's walk briskly and with long strides. At each step, his forefoot accepts quite high localized stress. But by the end of the day, the feet have begun to feel sore. You can see how the stride has shortened so that neither the heel nor the forefoot takes the stress alone. This slight limping and sense of soreness is a natural mechanism that preserves the foot during long walks. Now, it isn't easy to understand how the constant repetition of a very moderate, apparently painless force can cause real destruction in a foot. And to help people to understand, I'm just going to show you on my own arm. Now, I'm going to hit my arm just once, like that, and that might be 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms per square centimeter. It doesn't hurt, makes no mark. And if I repeat that several times all over my arm, it still doesn't hurt, because different pieces of skin are being under stress at different times. But if I hit the same piece of skin again and again and again and again, this is no more than the force that the foot experiences when it's running or walking fast. And now as I go on hitting it, it's rather like a very long walk. And whereas it wasn't painful at all at the beginning, now it's getting a little painful. And really, I must say I'm doing this in the cause of science and in the cause of education, because I would much prefer to stop now. But you see, if a person goes on and on walking, this is like hundreds of steps on the same piece of prominent skin on the foot. And the longer I go on, the longer is the walk, the more the tissues are beginning to change, and now it is quite painful, and I'm really going to stop. But now I don't know whether you can see in the camera, this piece of skin that I've been hitting very moderately, but very repeatedly, has turned red. Not only has it turned red, but it's far more sore. This doesn't hurt, that does hurt. Now, I've done this experiment much longer than this, and I must tell you that if I go on, this will finally become covered with little tiny petechial hemorrhages. It will form a blister, and I haven't been beyond that. I suppose, really, to prevent damage to an insensitive foot from long walks, the best rule is never walk long distances. If you haven't got pain, don't walk long distances. Take a bus. If you have to go a long way, ride a bicycle, ride a donkey. There's always some other way. And yet, I must admit, that rule isn't really practical. People have to walk. They've just got to get from here to there on their feet. And therefore we have a second rule. And the second rule is that if you have to walk a long distance, at least wear a shoe that is designed to keep the pressures on the foot low by spreading them evenly over the whole surface of the foot. Wear special shoes. We're now going to demonstrate 3 different ways in which, by means of a shoe or a sandal, we can help the patient to spread the stress equally over the surface of the foot. The first method is by using a soft insole. This material changes its shape when a person steps on it and helps to spread the stress. The second way we use is a molded insole, one that follows the shape of the foot. This is not soft, but it's molded. And the third way is by having a shoe which is rigid in its length and that rocks rather than bending. So we have softness, molding, and rocking. These can be used singly or in combination. Now we're going to demonstrate the use of softness to spread the stress in footwear. And I have for that purpose a thick piece of soft foam here. You can see how easily, as I push into it with an irregular shape, it conforms to whatever shape is impressed into it. I've drawn some little circles on the surface to indicate that the foams we use in shoemaking are always closed cell foams. That means that the air inside each little bubble cannot escape, and it is compressed by the weight bearing and therefore serves as a very nice springy material. Now when I put a foot onto material like this, putting it lightly, there's still a gap under the arch and there's still a gap here. But once the foot takes weight, it sinks right into the foam, and the foam rises up into these gaps and ensures that every single part of the foot takes weight pretty much equally, and therefore it's kind of ideal. But there are problems. One problem is that the whole thing is rather unstable. Soft foam would be very unstable in a shoe, and you can't use a thin layer of foam because it doesn't give space for the foot to sink into it. The foot begins to sink and immediately reaches the undersole. If you do try to put thick foam into a shoe, you're going to have the patient sink into the shoe when he takes weight and rise up in the shoe when he takes his weight off the ground. And at every step he'll go in and out of the shoe until by the end of the day he's got a blister on the back of his heel. So although it's good stuff, we never use it. We don't use thick, soft foam. We use a firmer material called microcellular rubber, a closed cell vulcanized rubber, 15 degrees Shear. That is the scale that the industry recognizes, 15 degrees Shear. And when you compress it with your fingers, you can compress it to about half of its previous thickness. This can go into a shoe, but really it's better in a sandal because you can fix the straps of a sandal to the surface of the foam so that when you take weight and sink down a little bit, the straps move with you, and therefore the foot doesn't move up and down against the straps, changing their tension and getting friction. And this is an excellent type of sandal that relies on the softness of the material to spread the stress of weight bearing in an ordinary village situation. Now we're going to discuss how molding of the shoe can help to spread the stress over the whole surface of a foot. Here we are back again at the soft material, and we noticed how taking weight on a soft material makes the material take the exact shape of the foot. Now if we were able to freeze this material and fix it in that position and then make an insole out of it like that, we would have spreading weight bearing without the business of having to go up and down inside the shoe. Now, I've asked our carpenters here to make an exact model, a negative model of the foot, and this could be regarded as an insole for a shoe. And now you see, I think they've done a pretty good job. As the foot comes down onto this insole, it fits everywhere perfectly. Now there's no weight bearing, and now there's perfect weight bearing everywhere. And we could cut a thin piece off the top of this wood and make it into an insole. You don't need it to be soft because it's a perfect fit and it's quite comfortable. However, it's taken them a long time, and it's a very difficult thing to do. Now, fortunately, today we know about materials which will do that. Here is one called plastizote, which can be softened at 140 degrees centigrade in an oven, and it can be fitted to the foot directly and will hold the shape. And dark tanned kid leather, goat leather, will do the same thing. And I'm going to show you, or some of our shoemakers are going to show you, how this can be done and how relatively simple it is. When we want to make a molded leather insole accurate to a patient's foot, it can be molded on the foot itself. Or, as in this case, we make a plaster model of the foot and form the insole on that. The leather we use is thin goat leather, which is bark tanned according to the ordinary country way in India. Now, this leather is wetted, and when it's wet, it becomes very moldable. And the shoemaker molds it over the surface of the model or the surface of the foot, and when he's satisfied with the mold, he bandages it onto the foot so that it will hold the shape. When this is made on a patient's own foot, it can be taken off after half an hour and put in the sun to dry. This one, made on a plaster model, has been dried for a longer period and now is ready to be made into part of a shoe. You see, it's an exact model. The high pressure points on the foot were marked in ink on the foot and have therefore come off to mark them on the model. We're going to make a molded insole from 1/2 centimeter thickness of polyethylene foam. This is plastizote, medium grade. It's a little stiff, but it is compressible, and it holds its shape. Now we have put a piece into this oven, which is controlled at 140 degrees centigrade, and it's been there for 3 or 4 minutes. And now you see this is floppy and soft, and I can use it for making a shoe. Now that we have the plastizote heated, we put it on some sponge. We put the patient's foot on it, and immediately I press. The patient doesn't do any pressing. I press the foot down. I have a hand on his knee and a hand on his foot, and a little piece of cardboard here under his toes. I don't think that we should ever make a mold to fit around the end of the toes, because toes move while you walk, even in a rigid shoe, and there should always be a little room beyond the toes to allow for that movement. And the patient does nothing. He doesn't push. I do all the pushing. And we hold this for about 2 or 3 minutes, and already this is stiff. We can take the foot away, take the cardboard off, and now we have a molded insole. Now here is our insole. We've cut away the excess plastizote, and it's perfectly molded to the shape of that individual foot, except for the toes, which have just been allowed to ride up a little without individual molding. Now, we sometimes back this with a thin piece of microcell rubber for durability. We fix it with adhesive, and we cut it to follow the same shape as this, and just to give this shape more durability. Here's a similar insole that you have just seen us make, made of the goat leather, and it is now set, and it can be put onto an undersole, and between the insole and the undersole we have to fill up the hollows to support this material. Here is one that's more nearly complete, lined with molded leather, and underneath the hollows filled up with cork. Here is one made of plastizote, flexible, and the hollows filled up with other layers of plastizote. There are many, many ways to do this, but the essentials are to have an accurate mold made on the person, and then to fill up the hollows with something that is supportive between it and the undersole. This is what we mean by a molded shoe or a molded insole. If it were only a problem of high pressure on the foot that we were dealing with, perhaps a soft insole and a molded insole would deal with the whole problem. But unfortunately, there's another form of stress, and that is shear stress. To explain what I mean by shear stress, we'll look at this piece of foam here. Pressure, or normal pressure, is force at right angles to the surface. So when I go straight down, I'm compressing. Shear stress is force that is not at right angles. It may be tangential, it may be horizontal. And this is shear stress. Now, if you look at a hand, this is pressure, or that is pressure, but this is shear stress. And it's everybody's experience that whereas this is quite comfortable, this is far from comfortable. For a normal foot, it is shear stress that helps a person in a tug of war from being pulled across the ground. The shear stress between the foot and the ground keeps him stable, and we need the shear stress for accelerating as we walk. But if the foot is damaged, if the patient has had some ulcer or wound, then you get a different situation. Now, if this piece of wood represents the foot as a whole, the skeleton of the foot, then we might use this piece of cloth to represent the skin covering the bones, the skin of the sole. And if so, this would be about the range of movement of the skin over the sole under the influence of shear stress. Now we're going to represent a wound, an ulcer, which has involved both the skin and the bone. And when it heals, this healed ulcer, which heals by scar, fixes the skin to the bone just at that particular point. And now when shear stress comes onto the foot, we get something like this happening. The wound is torn apart because selectively the shear stress is concentrated at the one part of the skin that cannot move. Now, I believe that this is the commonest cause of early recurrence of ulcer, particularly those which occur in metatarsal heads. The principle of the rocker shoe and the rocker sandal is designed to take care of shear stress around the ball of the foot, and particularly about that one moment in the stride when the foot is lifted up, the heel is off the ground, the arch is off the ground, and all the force of weight bearing is concentrated on the end of the metatarsal heads and the toes. This happens at every step in an ordinary flexible shoe, and all the molding around the heel and all the softness around the arch is all of no use, because everything is concentrated just there. Now, in this model sole of the foot, that is where the foot bends. And as this foot comes up, all the weight is on the end of this section and on the undersurface of the front. But if I put this on top of a rigid undersole, Now when I lift the foot, it doesn't bend, and it rests on the end of the shoe. Now this is very uncomfortable because it takes a lot of force to lift the heel on the basis of a long lever, and the heel will sometimes come away from the sole. So what we do is to put a rocker, a block of wood like this, under the front part of the foot, and now when the heel comes up, the toe goes down but doesn't take weight. Back, like a seesaw, this is rocking on the surface of the ground. And we can make the rocker any height or shape we like. We can make it rather forward, or we can put it in the middle of the foot like that. And here now is the basic structure of a rocker. You lift the heel and the toe does not take weight. The weight remains here and the foot does not bend. Or you can have a roller action like this, where the foot rolls forward, but it's the same principle. There's no bending. On top of this, you can put a soft insole of microcellular rubber, and that is a rocker shoe combining softness and rocking. Or you can have a molded, we got this backwards, we can have a molded insole like this, and that is a very good rocker shoe. Or we can have a molding made of leather, and that's a good rocker shoe. The one I like best is one that Dr. Stenström from Sweden designed for us, and he uses this kind of wooden rocker, which rather cunningly has a channel cut in the center longitudinally, so that if you step on a stone, you don't turn over. The stone is accommodated in that little channel. And underneath the wood, he puts a thin layer of microcell to soften the gait, and then a piece of hard rubber from a tire, and then on top of the rocker, he puts regular microcellular rubber, and the whole thing is designed to the shape of a normal foot, and that rocks like this. It's a kind of moderate rocker, and then we put straps on it. Actually, I'm wearing one now. I really enjoy this thing. And here is a well-worn Stenström rocker shoe, very, very appropriate for people who have scarred feet, who have shortened feet, who have irregular bones, who are subject to shear stress, and who need to walk around in rough village paths and jungle paths, and with insensitive feet. Some type of rocker shoe or sandal is good for the cases with severe problems. The fifth and last cause of damage to the insensitive foot is walking on an infected foot, on a foot that's already wounded. The other four causes all result in breaking the skin and soft tissue damage. But once infection gets in, further walking drives it down deep into the bones and may result in destruction of the whole foot. The reason more emphasis hasn't been placed on this, I think, is that you and I couldn't possibly put a foot to the ground after it has been wounded and infected. It would be too painful. And even when a patient knows that this is the wrong thing to do, he can't seem to remember it without pain to remind him. So in an emergency, he'll run along to the bathroom and then remember that he shouldn't have done it. And for this reason, we cannot recommend any form of special shoe for wearing when the foot is infected. The only treatment is total rest until it heals. This total rest can be done by means of rest in bed with the foot elevated to get the edema down and the discharge diminished. And then when the bed rest period of a few days is finished, we can put them into a plaster cast, carefully molded to every contour of the foot and of the leg, so that no movement is possible. And on that plaster cast, we can fix a bowler's iron so that he can do limited walking as soon as the plaster has properly set. And that plaster remains on until the ulcer is healed. Now then, just to recapitulate the 5 major causes of damage to the insensitive foot. The first is from direct damage or penetration by something sharp, and for that we recommend simply that the patient should never walk barefoot, and that his shoe should always have, or his sandal should always have, an impermeable layer, hard rubber or leather underneath, to protect the foot from direct damage. Second cause is long-term, low-pressure just enough to keep blood out of the skin at the edge of the foot. And for this, we recommend careful fitting. No new shoe should be purchased or fitted without particular concern that it isn't tight anywhere. And then we also say that no new shoe should ever be worn for more than 2 or 3 hours at a time during the first few days, so that one can pick up any problem rather early. The third cause, and the commonest cause really, of damage to the insensitive foot is from long walks, and particularly from long, fast walks. And here again, there's a rather simple rule. People without sensation of pain shouldn't take long walks. They should find some other way to get there if they've got to go a long distance, and they shouldn't hurry their walking. But we know that some people have to hurry their walking and they have to take long walks, and so we say that people with insensitive feet should have some way of spreading the stress over the foot so that the pressure is not unduly high at any one point. And for that we recommend a soft insole or an insole molded to the shape of the foot, molded on the foot. The fourth problem is shear stress, or horizontal oblique stress, and particularly this affects feet that have had a previous ulcer with a scar that limits the range of motion of the skin over the bone. And for this we recommend a rigid shoe that doesn't bend, that doesn't allow the foot to bend, and that rocks on a pivot of some sort, or that rolls over. On top of the rocker or the roller, we can have a soft insole or a molded insole. And finally, there's the foot that, in spite of all these precautions, does become wounded. And once the foot is wounded and thereby infected, we say that there is no shoe that should be allowed. It's a way of reinforcing the statement that no walking, not even one step, on an infected foot. The place for such a patient is in bed for the first day or two, with the foot elevated until the swelling comes down, and then a plaster of Paris, which allows them to walk to a limited extent until they're healed.